So we're saying the person has $200 budget and price of A and B is given. Each combination would cost $200 in total. The figure shows the budget line for this situation. It says any point along this line will produce an outcome where the consumption is maximized for this level of income. If there's a change in the price of one good, income remain unchanged, the budget line will pivot. So, for example, if the price of B falls, then more of this product can be purchased at all levels of income. Budget line will shift outwards from the point at A. This figure is 7.1b. Um, so what do we need to understand here? We understand that basically we have the quantity of products that can be bought for $20, and we have the quantity of products that can be bought for $10, right? We can basically graph this, and what we get is this budget line. So what we're saying, if this person buy 10 products, basically this would come up to the $200. They can buy 0 of B, right? And that's a situation. If they buy 20 of B, they can buy 0 of A. At any point along this situation, along this combination, is the maximum they can buy. So if they choose to buy 6A, then they can buy 6B in return. That's what basically what the line is showing us, right? So what we're saying is that, and this is important for you to understand, this is the two effects can happen. We can have the substitution effect and the income effect. So we're saying that how there's two ways your income can change, right? Um, Anybody know what are the two ways how your income can change? So for example, this is one example of income changing. And this is another example of income changing. What's the difference between these two examples? Guys, both of these are example of income increasing. How are they different? Nobody knows. Aren't you guys studying on your own already? You should know these things. So what we're saying is that so before we get into understanding what is substitution effect and income effect, we have to understand how the budget can change, right? So it says it's always the case that a rational consumer will substitute towards a product which has become relatively cheaper. With the fall of the price in B, the consumer actually has more money to spend on other products, B including real income has therefore increased, and which may mean that the consumer may now actually purchase more of B. This is called the income effect of price. So either as income increase, the consumer choose to buy more of the other product, which is a substitution effect, or the consumer choose to buy more of the product which the price have fallen first. So let's say the price of B has gone down. If the consumer chooses to buy more of A, then the substitution effect has happened. If the consumer decides to buy more of B, then the income effect has occurred. So we're going to try to learn what all of that mean. This is just review. These are basically what you should know from AS level. So you should know what is income elasticity, what is cross elasticity, right? This should be in the back of your mind. Um, so the first thing we learn is that there's a budget curve, right? We know everybody is limited by how much money they have, how much income they have, and how much of a given combination of two products they can buy. The next thing we need to take into consideration is what is called an indifference curve. What does indifference mean? What does it mean to be indifferent?
It's like neither good or nor bad. It's like mediocre in a way.
I guess, but in this situation, what we're saying is that there you have no preference between A and B. So if you're indifferent, it means A and B equally means the same to you. So in this case, if you have product A and product B, and you're indifferent between product A and product B, it doesn't matter. You would equally buy product A or product B. So in this case, what will affect your decision is basically the price, right? It means that A gives you the same utility, B gives you the same utility. The only differentiating factor will be the price. If the price of A goes up, then basically B now becomes better to you. So we can basically put this on a graph, and this is what we call an indifference curve. This, it says, it represents what the consumer wants. Budget constraint above refer shows a combination of a good consumers could buy with a given income and the price given the prices of the good. This is only part of the reason why consumer buy a particular good. What is also relevant is a consumer preference. Consumers will only buy a particular good if there is something they actually want or prefer when having to choose between two alternatives. Consumer preference can be represented diagrammatically by what is known as an indifference curve. So it says, as the name suggests, an indifferent curve shows the different combination of two goods that give the consumer equal satisfaction. So as I said, right, your A and B gives you the same utility. Initially, you're indifferent between them, which means they're both equal to you. What will determine which one you choose is, of course, for one, your income level, but what we're more looking at is the price level. So will the income effect or will the substitution effect determine what amount of this product you consume? Um, it says consider indifference curve I1. The consumer is indifferent with respect to the combination. Okay, we're going to look at this on the graph. It says the slope of the indifference curve is important. It represents the extent to which consumer is willing to substitute one good for another. Looking at the figure, both curves slope more steeply from the left to the right, showing that when when consuming a large amount of good A, the consumer will be willing to give up rather more of this good when the consumption of B is small. The rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute one product for another is known as the marginal rate of substitution. So this is what I was saying, right? Marginal is going to keep coming up over and over again. So all we're saying is that if you're consuming A and you start consuming more of B, the amount of basically how much you're willing to substitute A with B is what we call the marginal rate of substitution. Um, so this is the situation that we have right here. It's where it's saying, considering indifference curve, I1 consumers indifferent with respect to the combination of X, Y, and Z, since they are each on the same indifference curve. If the consumer moves from point Y to Z, then the consumption of good B falls at the expense of an increase in good A. Point Y, though, still represent a situation where the consumer is still equally happy with the combination of good. So what are we saying? If the consumer moves from Z to Y, so we're looking at the here, right? The consumer is at Z and moves to Y, the consumption of good B falls at the expense of an increased consumption in A. So we have good A on this side, we have good B on this side. What we're saying is that any point on this curve, so point X, point Y, point Z, any point that we choose, it can be a point up here, a point up here. Basically, it's a um, maximization of the consumer satisfaction. So it doesn't matter if the consumer choose here or here or here. On this curve, basically any point on this curve, the consumer is maximizing their consumption of two products, product A and product B, right? So at point Z, the consumer chooses to consume more of product B and less of product A, right? If the consumer goes to point X, the reverse happens, or the opposite happens. The consumer chooses to consume more of product A and less of product B, but the maximum utility, right? So that goes back all the way to up here where we started from the beginning. This the consumer, so at point point X or Z, which is was Z, right? The bottom one, this is the situation. The consumer is choosing to consume more of B and less of A, right? And at the other point, the reverse happens. The consumer is choosing to consume more of A and less of B. But again, this would have to be in this table can't represent that reverse situation because the utility would have to be higher here than in this case, right? This is one situation where the utility of B is higher than A, so the consumer would always choose to consume more B than A. But you get the general idea. What we're saying is that on this indifferent curve, it doesn't matter if it's at point X, the consumer is indifferent between the consumption of B and A because the total utility given is maximized at this point. The second situation that can happen, some factor can determine the or can change the total utility for the consumer, right? So in this case, we go to indifference curve 2. And in this case, at every point on this curve, so it doesn't matter which point, any point on this curve, the utility is higher than the red utility is higher than the blue utility. The consumer is getting more satisfaction at this point, right? As we go forward, we're going to look at situation that would cause the indifference curve to shift this way. Another thing that you have to understand, that when we talk about utility indifference curve, basically it's not unique, right? Nobody has like any specific indifference curve. What we're saying is, why is it not behaving smart? So what we're saying is this: the indifference curve. So you could have this one, this one, this one. It doesn't matter. You have like infinite combination, right? And basically going this way, what we're saying is your utility is increasing. So everybody has, sorry, they can't overlap. Everybody have infinite number of indifference curve. What is the limiting factor? Why can't you continue to infinity this way? Guys, I'm saying everybody have varying or a variation. Their indifference from one person to the next person, their indifference curve is different, as this is basically is determined by preference, right? So as we shift to the right, your utility is increasing. So what would make you have what would make this be your indifference curve? Let's say this one, this is your indifference curve. What would stop you from reaching this one? So think of that as we move forward. This is the idea here, right? So what we're saying is that the marginal rate of substitution, basically, we this is similar to the x over y, or calculating the slope of the this curve, right? So we're saying we need to give up, we give up one of, what is this, the skiing, and we gain 2 day of horseback riding, right? We can either look at it going down or we can look at it in the reverse, right? So we see it starts steep and then it gets flatter and flatter. So we see we have to give up two first, and then we give up one for one, right? And that is straightforward. If we go back to the pizza example, the ice cream example, the more ice cream you consume, the less utility you get from it, right? So the same thing, originally you give up some of your days skiing to go horseback riding, but there's only so much horse you can ride before the enjoyment goes away, right? So eventually you'll give up, the benefit you get from horseback riding will start diminishing. Originally, like, um, you have to give up more skiing to get high satisfaction from horseback riding, but you ride one horse, you basically have ridden all the horses, so the satisfaction you get from riding horse diminishes. This is why we see the marginal rate of substitution is getting smaller and smaller due to the principle of diminishing return. It says a higher indifferent curves represent higher level of consumption for consumer, therefore preferred to be higher rather than lower. So any logical person, any rational person would prefer to have a higher indifference curve. As I said, your indifference curve can keep going and going to the right. Another thing you need to understand, all indifference curve are downward sloping to indicate a fall in the quantity consumed of one good is accompanied by an increase in the consumption of another good. Indifference curve cannot cross. So as you saw, when I was drawing here, these curves cannot overlap. They can be close together, but they can never overlap. Um, Indifference curve are convex or bowed inward from the origin. So this shape, right? This is what we call convex. The reverse, when the shape is this way, is what we call concave. Um, so that's the given about the shape of the indifference curve, right? We know that it's downward sloping, they cannot cross, and it's convex. Let's continue from there. Let's try to put everything together. So it says the budget line constraint and the indifference curve can now be used together. So the reason why your indifference curve cannot continue going for perpetuity or for to infinity is basically we have something missing from this situation, and what is missing is the budget curve. So if we put a budget curve, why, if we put a budget line, this is basically what happened, right? Of course, all of these, in theory, all of these level of satisfaction exists for you. You just don't have the money to buy this level of satisfaction. Your budget has limited you to only these two indifference curve, basically. So even here at this point, you can't afford this point. Your budget would not allow you to afford this point. You can only afford the level of satisfaction um, to what falls under your budget curve. So you have this level of money, and this level of money will buy you this amount of product and give you this amount of satisfaction. If you want this level of satisfaction, you basically have to increase your budget. So if you increase your budget to here, then of course your satisfaction has gone up. If you're able to increase your budget to here, again, the level of satisfaction has gone up. So basically, money can buy you happiness, right? They say money can't buy happiness. So this is what we're proving here, right? That basically, the more income you have, the more of your combination of satisfaction you are able to obtain. Um, so what are we looking at? What we're saying is that we can now put the indifference curve and the budget line together. When we put this together, an interesting scenario starts happening. It says the budget line and the indifference curve can now be used together to show the effect of change in income and consumption of two goods. That's the figure below, right? The consumer choice is optimal at the point where the budget line touches or is at a tangent to the highest indifference curve. So E1 will give the consumer the maximum combined consumption of good A and B, and the budget constraint shows by the line B1. If income increase, it will allow the consumer to choose a better combination of A and B. And this usually be more of each good. So if the budget constraint rises to B2, the consumer will increase consumption of good A and good B, albeit to a lesser extent. E2 is the new equilibrium. So let's go look at the graph. This is what we have, right? So there's two ways your budget curve can shift. This was the question initially asked. We now come to understand how the budget curve can shift. So in this situation, your total, this was your original income. Let's say the black line, or this first line, the B1 was your original budget. So let's say this was your $200 budget. So let's just say, for example, your parents give you a $200 stipend a month. With this $200, you can buy any combination, you can buy any point along this curve, right? Um, but the point where your satisfaction is maximized is where the indifference curve, the highest indifference curve, right? So what we're saying is that, let me see. So what we're saying is that you have thousands or infinite level of indifference curve, right? But your budget, this is your budget line constrain you. So you can have all these indifference curve below the budget line. Stay proper. What we're saying is that the rational consumer is basically is not gonna choose any of these, but this indifference curve, because they're not getting the maximum satisfaction. Where the consumer will choose, they will choose the highest budget, this highest indifference curve, and this indifference curve is gonna be basically parallel. Forgive my drawing, the software is behaving weird. um so at this point, right, wherever the indifference curve is tangent, or basically where the indifference curve meets the budget line, this is the maximum level of satisfaction attainable, and all consumer will choose this point. So this is what we're seeing here on this graph. We're saying that at point E1, given budget B1, the consumer is maximizing their utility, and all rational consumer would choose to consume this combination of good A and good B. No, something would be wrong with you if you choose, basically you're irrational if you choose at this point, or irrational if you choose at this point. This would give you the maximum level of satisfaction because of your budget. So basically, if you try to choose at this point, you would be able to consume more A, but you're not using your budget properly. So you're not buying the maximum combination of each product that you can buy. You would buy at this point because this is utilizing your budget, or using the money that you have to buy the maximum A and the maximum B. What we saw somewhere from, where was it, all the way in the beginning, right? We saw here. So the all the unique combination, right, or from this situation again all the way from this first one, this is what we're seeing, where you can buy this isn't the best example, but let's say it would be here 8. You'd be buying 2 of A and 4 of B, right? That would be the ultimate, or the position where you're maximizing your utility. So basically, this is what we're seeing here. So let's say here, right? This would give you, just for example, this would give you 2 of A and 8 of B. Here, your utility is being maximized. So how can your budget change? So we said originally your parents is giving you $200. For this change to happen, so we see the budget curve completely shift to the right. Some outside factor has to affect your budget. So your parents now starts giving you $400 in income. So your budget curve has completely shifted. So this means what we need to understand here is nominal. Your nominal income has increased. So you went from having $200 to now having $400. So you go from B1 to B2. So your nominal budget has increased. Price has not changed. Your budget, your income has changed. The amount of money that you have has changed. So this is normally not that common for your budget to increase this way, right? But that's not important here. What is important is that your nominal budget has changed. You literally have more income. So your budget curve goes from B1 to B2. Of course, the reverse can happen, right? Your parents decide you're not studying enough, so they decide to give you less stipend. So instead of giving you $400, they now start giving you $200. So your entire budget has shift. You now have less money. So you can, before you could buy this combination of products, so a lot of A and a lot of B. Your income has completely changed, so you can buy less A, less B now, and you're here. You would shift from indifference curve 2 to indifference curve 1, as again you're maximizing your utility. So on budget 2, this is where you get the maximum utility. As your budget decrease, as your income decrease, you would go to E1 because this is where you get the maximum satisfaction. So we explain what has happened here, how your budget has changed here. We go back to the initial question I asked: how is the budget changing here now?
Okay, so the price of bananas increased.
Right.
So,
So good, but actually you have it backwards, right? So in this case, what is happening? Your total income is changing, so your nominal income is changing, right? In this situation, your real income is changing. Somebody, and in this case, the price of banana has not increased. The price of banana has actually decreased. Oh, my bad. You're correct. We go from B1 to B2. Right.
okay.
My bad. I was looking at it wrong. I was thinking this was B1. So in this case, the price of banana has basically increased, right? So your real income has changed. What this means is that originally you could have bought at point A. So you could buy this combination of banana and this combination of apples, but the price of banana has increased, right? So because the price of banana has increased, your budget can no longer support this combination. You have to basically choose, do I continue buying the same amount of banana, which means I buy less apple, or do I buy less banana and basically I like to eat banana, so I have to continue buying banana, which means then I will have to buy less quantity of both, which will bring us to C, right? So what are we saying? Because there's a change in the price, you're in real terms, your money, this is what real means, right? We have covered this already. In real terms, your money can no longer buy what it's used to buy. So inflation has happened, right? So your currency, your purchasing power has decreased. So because your purchasing power has decreased, your budget will shift. So we see your budget shift from B1, this budget line here, um, this this I2 was supposed to be here with this indifference curve, and this B2 was supposed to be here with the line. Don't confuse it. Um, so what we're saying is, because of the inflationary effect, because of your purchasing power decreasing, your budget curve would have shift. So in this case, it doesn't matter. Let me see if I have another one. Do I have another
Wait,
indifference?
can I get an explanation on the imaginary B3 line
We're
we
gonna we're
have going on?
Yeah, I'm gonna reach to that shortly.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Sorry.
gonna explain what is income and substitution effect. So here, right, we see this shift is different, right? So in this case, the price of good what is happening, right? The price of good A has decreased, right? So you can now, because the price of A has decreased, you can now buy more of A, right? Or you now, your purchasing power has increased, so you're now capable of buying more of one good or another. So the rational consumer will choose to either buy more of A or buy more of B. And this is where the income or substitution effect comes in. So that's what we're going to try to understand, right? Um, where is it? So here it says that X is an inferior good, right? We're going to come back to this as, where is it? Where is it? It shouldn't have been X. It was, my graph is messed up. Where did we go? We started. So banana is actually an inferior good. This wasn't supposed to be good X. Banana was the inferior good, and we're gonna understand why shortly. So let's continue. We're the next thing. So we know how your budget curve can change, right? Either your income completely increase, which we're saying your nominal income has increased, or the other situation is your real income has changed. So either your real income, in this case, your real income has decreased, your purchasing power has decreased because the price of one good has increased. The reverse can happen, as we saw in the other graph below. The price of a good goes down, so then the curve would have, this would have been B1, and it moves to this point, right, B2, which means you can now buy more of either good. What is important here, what we're going to try to understand next, is which good are you going to buy more of? Are you going to buy more bananas or more apples? And here is where the substitution and income effect comes in. So in this case, just looking at this, we can see that the substitution effect is greater than the income effect, right? Um, those are the things that we're going to try to understand. So it says key concept, a budget line represents the extent to consumers' income, and indifferent curves indicate the possible choices that are available. When combined, they show how consumers can maximize their satisfaction. Income and substitution effect of price change using indifference curve. It says the income and substitution effect of a price change were briefly outlined earlier. It says the higher the price for a good will cause a budget constraint to shift to the left. So we went over this, right? So that it's tangent with a lower indifference, tangent was the word. So it's tangent with a lower indifference curve representing a reduced level of utility. So basically in this situation, what we're saying, as your real income decrease, your budget will shift until it, as we see, it's tangent with this new curve. And as we said, as you move to the right, so basically um, here, right, what we're saying is as you move this way, right, we were saying as you move this way, your utility is increasing. What we're seeing here is that the reverse has happened, right? Your budget line has basically moved to this point. Your right or wrong. Your ah, this is what has happened, right? So we see that you're moving this way, and because you're moving this way, you're originally you used to be at this point, which was you're getting a lot of satisfaction. You have now moved, let's say your new indifference curve is here, you have now moved to this point, so your satisfaction has decreased because your real income has decreased, so you're getting less satisfaction. So just think of it again, here you could buy, like, let's say 20 banana and 10 apple. You're now able to buy only, let's say, 6 apple and like 14 banana. So of course the amount of products that you can consume has decreased, so the amount of satisfaction that these you used to get from these products have decreased also. um Continuing from there, we're saying that the income and substitution effect on the price change using indifference curve. So it says the income and substitution effect of a price change were briefly outlined earlier. A higher price of a good will cause the budget constraint to shift. So it's conservatively, a lower price of a good will cause the opportunity set to shift to the right. So the tangent is higher. to it's at a higher indifference curve, representing an increase in utility, right? So what I was just explaining, the reverse of that. Exactly how much change in price will lead to the quantity demanded of each good will depend on personal preference. A key concept to keep in mind is the relative price. It says the income and substitution effect of a price change were briefly outlined earlier. Why in this slide it came out different. Um, so it says a year of college costs about the value of a Toyota Camry. Those tickets to see, I guess, X-Men cost me 3 weeks worth of food. So relative, right? Relative means we're comparing one thing to another thing. So the cost of your college tuition is the same as a car, or the cost of watching a movie basically could be 3 weeks of food, relatively speaking. So anyone who faces a change in price will experience two interlinking motivation, a substitution effect or an income effect. What is the substitution effect? You should be familiar with substitution and income effect already from elasticity, right? Um, but this is a little bit different. It says income effect is that when, so we learned substitution already when we learned elasticity, right? Substitution is basically there's a alternative good for it, right? In this case, why it's different is that we're limiting it to only two goods. So you only have good A and good B. You can either consume good A or good B. So you're either consuming more of B or you're substituting B with A. So if oranges become more expensive, food lover will scale back on orange and eat more apples or any other. Realistically, there's a lot of products that you can substitute with, right? But because of the limitation we have, we can only show two products on the graph. It says when a good becomes cheaper, people substitute towards consuming more. If oranges get cheaper, people are gonna fire up their juice machines and ease off other fruits and foods. Um, the income effect refers to how a change in price of a good alters the effective buying power of one's income. If price of a good falls, basically you have more money, so you buy more of that product, right? So the buying power, or what we call the purchasing power of a has diminished if the price increase, right? One common source of confusion is the income effect does not refer to a change in actual income. So again, if we go back here, right? When we're talking about income effect, we're not talking about this. So how I normally differentiate it for students to understand, this is a nominal change. This is a real change. When we're talking about a real change, we're talking, here is where the substitution and income effect comes in. So here it says again, common source of confusion, right? Does not, instead it refers to a situation where the price of a good change, thus the quantities of the good can be purchased with a fixed amount of income. Um, it might be more accurate to call income effect a buying power effect, right? So your purchasing power is changing. But the income effect terminology has been used for decades and it's not going to change anytime soon. Whenever price changes, consumers feel the pull of both substitution and income effect at the same time. Although the substitution and income effect are often discussed as a sequence of events, it should be remembered that they are twin components of a single cause, a change in price. Although you can analyze them separately, the two effects are always proceeding hand in hand. So, for simplicity, right, for you to understand what is happening, where's my next graph? For simplicity, we are going to explain, normally we explain the substitution effect first, then the income effect. This way it becomes easy to understand what is happening. So we explain it sequentially. But in reality, they don't happen in a sequence. They happen simultaneously. If the price goes up, it's not like, oh, in substitution effect, you're going to substitute first, then afterwards consider your income, and then you change how your buying pattern. Simultaneously, both of them will happen, and your consumption behavior will change automatically. But for it to be explained in a clear way, we take a sequential approach. So this is what this is saying here, right? That although they are analyzed separately, they happen at the same time. So keep that in mind when it comes to your explanation. These two effects can now be interpreted using indifference curve. This is the figure below. It says if the price of good A falls, then it means that the consumer has more spending power, more purchasing power. This is represented by the new budget curve B2. So this is what we're seeing here. The price of good A has decreased, so the real income has increased from B1 to B2. The price of good B remains the same, which is why B2 pivot upwards at a new position of A. So only the price of A has changed, right? The price of good B has not changed. So this is why the curve moved this way, right? Again, if you're thinking logically, if both the price of B and A and B decrease at the same time, then we should also see a parallel or almost parallel shift, right? But that will determine on the percentage change in price, right? But don't think about that. They won't. Normally, they won't ask you something that far. They will just give you a basic curve like this. Either A is pivoting or B is pivot. Sorry, either A or B is pivoting. You'll get a budget constraint and indifference curve looking something like this. It says a movement along the initial indifference curve I1 to point E. This is the substitution effect. It's so called since the consumer buy less of B and is now relatively more expensive than good A. A shift upwards to a higher indifference curve moving from point E to E3 is the income effect as consumer has more spending power. It is positive in the case of both goods, resulting in an increase in the consumption of B as well as good A. So how do we understand this on the graph? What we're saying, right, as Unobat was asking, this broken line, what is this broken line? So when we try to explain it in a sequential, from a sequential perspective or taking a sequence to explain it, we're saying that the price of good A has decreased, right? So the first thing that the consumer is going to do, because the price of good A has decreased, the consumer is going to move from E1 to E2. The consumer price, let's say this is Apple, the price of Apple has become cheaper. So we would think that a rational consumer would start buying more Apple because the price of Apple has gone down, right? So how do we find the point where the consumer is gonna buy this new product? There's two things we need to take into consideration. So how do we find the substitution effect? What we need to be able to do is this is what we have, right? So we have our initial budget curve here. We have our new budget curve. And what we're saying is that the substitution effect, right? The substitution effect is going to be parallel. So you draw an imaginary line that is parallel to the new budget line. So this one, right? It has to be parallel. This imaginary budget line is parallel to the new budget line. And of course, we have our initial indifference curve. Let me see if this is why probably it's hard to draw. What we're saying is that you had your initial indifference curve, right? And what we're saying is that wherever this imaginary budget curve is tangent. So let's say this is the point here that it's tangent to the original indifference curve. This is the substitution effect. So that's what we're seeing here on the graph. this broken line, the imaginary line, as we can see, it's parallel to the B2 line, right? So we draw a imaginary budget line, the dotted line, that is parallel to the new budget curve. And wherever this is tangent to the initial indifference curve to I1, this is where the substitution effect will be. So this shows us that if the price of A decrease, the consumer will start consuming more of good A. So again, let's just use apple and banana. This is banana, this is apple. What this is showing us is that the consumer has started to substituting apple for banana. So originally, let's say here, this was 10 banana, 4 apple. The consumer has now begin to consume, let's say, 8 apples and 4 banana, right? They have increased their consumption of apple versus the consumption of banana. So we only have 2 products. So the substitution can only be between these 2 products. Because the price of A decreased, you now consume more A, which is logical or rational, right? Again, we're talking about it in sequence. But what we need to take into consideration next is this person actually has more real income. So this person has more money in their hand. They don't have to buy more banana, more apple. This person might really like banana. So why would they buy substitute banana with apple? So this is where the income effect comes in. The income effect is basically moving from the old budget curve to the new budget curve. This is what we were saying here, right? A shift upwards to a higher indifference curve. So again, in the beginning, I said the only way to reach your new indifference curve, right? I said initially we have infinite level of indifferent curves going this way, right? The way to reach one of these indifference curve, you basically have to increase your income, right? You have to shift your budget to you basically need more money. So this is what we're seeing happening here. The consumer has more money in real terms. Their purchasing power has increased. So of course the consumer can now achieve a higher indifference, a higher utility maximization. So this consumer will not stay on this lower budget indifference curve. They will migrate or they will change their consumption pattern to the higher indifference curve, because any indifference curve going to the right gives a higher satisfaction. So this is the income effect kicking in. Because the person has more money, the person will now move to a different consumption pattern. And this consumption pattern basically involves consuming both more of product A, right? But what have we seen happen in terms of product B? Product B has basically, they are consuming less of product B than before. Originally, they were here at this point, right? They were consuming somewhere here. They are now consuming at this point. So this is where the inferior and normal and what was it? Where's the first graph? Brains is not braining. Right, inferior and normal good comes in, right? We're gonna see that later. So what we can determine from here is that given this new budget and indifference curve combination, this person would choose to consume more of A. So originally they were only consuming this quantity of A. They have now decided to increase their consumption of A and decrease their consumption of B. So basically, what can we see? How do we understand? If we look at this arrow here, the substitution effect is greater than the income effect. So what this means is that when the substitution effect is greater, we'll see it should come out. Where's my next graph? Normal, good. Here explain all of that, right? Right. So what we're saying is that what is this? We draw another being tangent. I have a I should have a good explanation of it. Where did I summarize it? I didn't summarize it. Okay, I didn't really summarize it. I guess I normally just would say. So there's two things we need to understand, right? This is a normal good. When we look at a normal good, we see what the substitution effect and the income effect are moving in the same direction. When we look at the other situation, we see that basically the first graph might have shown it here. What do we see? When we're talking about inferior good, we see that the income and substitution effect are moving in different direction. So what is important here is that which effect is larger. So if the substitution effect is larger, then we basically know that the the other product will be consumed more, right? So which means if the substitution effect is larger, then it means banana is an inferior good. This person, they have more money, but they choose not to consume. And remember, what's an inferior good, right? We said an inferior good is as your income increases, you consume less of this product, right? This is what we learned from demand and elasticity all the way like in 10th grade, is that the it was substitution, inferior and normal good, right? So a normal good is a type of good when your income increase, you consume more of this good. An inferior good is the type of good when your income increase, you consume less of this, right? So we learned that all of that, we learned that theory in 10th grade. We are now putting basically a visualization to it. This is how a good is determined if it's inferior in or normal. It is based on your budget and your satisfaction that you get from that product. So this person gets more satisfaction from consuming apple than consuming banana. So once the price of apple goes down, or in this case the price of apple went up, this person will choose to give up banana and consume more apple. The same thing we're seeing happening in this different situation. Like in this situation, let's say this is apple, the price of apple has gone down, and this is banana, the person will choose to consume more apple than consuming banana. So the substitution effect is greater than the income effect, and we get a new indifference curve. So again, to quickly go over, the broken or tangent line is parallel to the new budget curve, and this shows us um, the substitution effect, right? So if the question asks you to, one of these question always comes out, a utility question always comes out in the exam. It's one of the harder questions to answer, so most students try to avoid this question. But if this comes out, basically you need to know how to draw it. So again, the broken line is always parallel to the new budget curve, and it should be tangent to your old indifference curve. And you just pick a point where it's tangent, and this is the substitution effect. The new budget curve needs to be tangent to your new indifference curve, and wherever point they are intersecting, this is your new equilibrium, basically, right? Your combination of good A and good B. And um, this by itself is the income effect. But again, this is just explaining it chronologically so you can understand it. Realistically, in real life, they happen simultaneously. And basically, you wouldn't just start consuming more apple and then realize, I have more money. Sorry, I should consume less banana, more apple. This happens automatically. You go to the market, you see the price of banana has gone up. You're like, banana is too expensive. I won't buy it. Let me buy more apple instead. This happens automatically. So this is what we're saying, right? It says in the case of good A, the income and substitution effect are both positive, resulting in a substantial increase in good B, and the substitution effect is negative, but a fall in consumption is to some extent offset by a positive um, okay, there's a mistake here. They shouldn't have been both positive. They're moving in opposite direction. So this is, so here I made a mistake where I said they're both positive. Or not a mistake. This is from the textbook. So this is basically a mistake. What we're saying is that this part is correct. The substitution effect for good B is negative. Why it's negative is that there's a fall in the quantity, right? So let's say this was 100 and we now move to, let's say, 80. So there's a fall of 20, right? This is a negative here because the quantity consumed has fallen by 20. So you have decreased your consumption of banana by 20. So we're saying the substitution effect is negative, right? Um, and then, but so if only the substitution effect was taken into consideration, we would have a significant fall in the consumption of banana, right? But again, as I said, it happens simultaneously. So this person decided, I have more money, but 10 apple is enough. I should still buy some banana. So they will not buy as much banana as before. So the income effect kicks in. They decide I buy 10 apple and instead of buying like 100 banana, I buy 90 banana instead. So that is the income effect. So there's a positive here, right? Moving back from this little box here, right? So moving from the original substitution effect was a big negative, but the income effect now is positive. You're adding back some banana to your combination of products that you're buying. So this positive reduces the negative effect, and we have, this is what we're saying here. So here the income and substitution effect are pulling in opposite direction, right? So this graph shows it better, right? The first graph we see, the income effect is positive. So originally the substitution effect moves from Q3 to Q1, a big fall in the quantity consumed because of substituting, but the income effect becomes positive and you move from Q1 to Q2. So Q2, my bad, where was it? No, you move from, my bad, it was here, like basically, yeah. Q2, right? So you go from Q1 to Q2, there is an increase in the quantity, a small offset from the substitution effect. So that's what we're saying here. This is why it's hard to explain in the exam, right? Students struggle to explain this, explain it properly. So if you have no other choice, again, try to understand this part properly, understand income substitution effect, be able to draw the graph and be able to explain what is indifference, what is budget line, and how this shows the position the consumer will choose. If you can explain that properly, then you can get a good answer, a good grade for it, right? But keep it in the back of your mind. Make sure you know to do it because there might be other questions that come out that might be easier to explain. But if something comes out and you literally don't know how to do it, and you have the choice between that or the indifference curve, at least if you understand the indifference curve and can explain it a bit, it's better than not doing anything. Um, so we continue from there and we say, so here the income and substitution are pulling in opposite direction, right? So when the product is an inferior good, we see that the substitution and income effect moves in different directions. So there's a positive and there's a negative, and they settle at some point. The next figure, there's a fall in consumption of B as the substitution effect is stronger than the income effect, right? That was this one, 7.4. So the substitution effect is greater than the income effect. So we know that B is an inferior good and A is actually a normal good, right? Your income has increased and your consumption of A has increased. Means A is a normal good and it means B is an inferior good. In the case of inferior goods, we saw in chapter 2 or throughout your economics career, when income rises, this is what I explain, right? Consumer buys more of less of the inferior good. Here, the income effect is negative. When this leads to a fall in consumption, will depend relatively on the strength of the substitution effect. If it is greater than the income effect, then more of the inferior good will be consumed. Um, so this is just straightforward inferior and normal good, right? If one of the other is consumed more, then it means that this is the inferior, this is the normal. If the reverse was to happen, then it would mean this is, of course, if the consumer choose to consume more of one product when they're, in this case, the budget is increasing, right? If the budget decrease, then the one that they choose to consume more means it's an inferior good. As we know the theory, when your income decrease, you consume more of an inferior good and less of a normal good. Um, the next thing we need to understand is a normal good. So in a normal good, what do we see? We see that both substitution and income effect is moving together, right? So where are we? We are at B1, we move to B2, so which means the price of banana has increased. That's what you need to be able to see on the graph. Also, you need to be able to see what has happened. So if the budget curve shift to the left, it means your income has decreased, which means price of whichever product the the curve is pivoting away from, that price has changed. So in this case, we move from B1 to B2, so we can automatically determine that the price of banana has increased. So we do the same thing. We draw the invisible or the tangent budget line. So again, you see here it as they have it marked as B3, right? So this is your budget line if only the substitution effect was taken into consideration, which this person would choose to be at point B on the original indifference curve, right? So as the price of banana increased, the person would substitute more apple with banana. Again, banana has become expensive. So the person would stop buying banana and instead starting buying more apple, right? But of course, the real income of this person has decreased. So this person needs to adjust their spending behavior. And what will happen, we will have a new budget curve, B2. And so where the budget curve is tangent to the new indifference curve, I2 is going to be the position where they're going to now be. So we see in this case, both the um, consumption of apple has decreased a little bit, right? This is not a good example. Normally, I would draw it on the board. It shows to show it clearer. So what we see is that the clearly the consumption of banana has fallen, right? So it has gone from Q3 to Q1. So there's a significant drop in the consumption of banana. But this person also has less income. So they can no longer buy the amount of product they were able to buy. Let's say here they were able to buy 10 apple and 20 banana. Here they can now buy only 8 apple and let's say 2 or 3 banana, because this is all that their money can buy. The money can no longer buy the same amount of product as before. So we see the income effect has caused both quantities to fall, right? So this the the consumption of how should I this is not a the graph is not a good example. Okay, let's say this has not fallen. It has not fallen that much, but basically has remained similar, right? Um, so what we're seeing is that as the income has decreased, basically the we're it's clearly obvious that the consumption of banana has decreased, but what has happened to the consumption of apple, right? So the what we're interested in here is not apples, but in this case in banana, because both the effect have moved in the same direction. So because this person has decreased, the substitution effect has caused them to decrease their consumption of banana, and the income effect has also caused them to decrease their consumption of banana, right? So forget apples as it becomes confusing if we put apples in it. Let's just look at the banana situation. So we're saying that as the price of banana has decreased, the person choose to substitute another product for banana. That's the substitution effect. But as their income has become less, they also have decided to buy less of this product. So both are moving in the same direction. So we basically know in this case, banana is the normal good, which then makes apple the inferior good because this person is choosing to consume more apple or the same level of apple, but less banana. So their income has decreased, their consumption of banana has decreased. Again, the theory of normal good is that as your income decreases, you consume less of that product, while the theory of inferior good is that as your income decreases, you consume more of that product, right? So in this case, forget apples, as it will make it in the substitution effect, it's easy to understand with both products. But in the income effect, just focus on one product and then it's easier to see how, sorry, not the income, the normal good, right? It's easier to see how a good is normal in that both effects are moving in the same direction, which means as this person income became less, they choose to consume less bananas, which means in this case, banana is a normal good. Okay, this is what we're saying. You know, buy less banana, the budget curve substitution effect. We draw the parallel line income effect. However, income has fallen, choosing the consume the change due to income. In this case, a normal good, the income and substitution effects reinforce each other, both leading to lower demand. Right? It's what I was saying here. The person demands less banana, so it follows the theory of normal good. So it's a normal good, right? Income decreases, quantity decreases, so it's a normal good. Understanding inferior good, so this is just basically what we went over already. We see the effects are moving in both direction. Again, we draw the parallel line. This happens here, and the person would have decided to consume, the substitution effect would have kicked in, right? This person would have consumed more apples, but the income, because they have more money, they decided to buy a little bit more apple in bananas instead. And we says a rise in price changes the budget line. You can now buy less bananas. The budget curve shift to B2, the using the parallel line. However, income effect leads to an increase from Q1 to Q2. Overall demand has fallen, but the substitution effect is partly offset by the income effect. This is because when income falls, the decline in income causes us to buy more inferior good because we can't afford the normal or luxury good anymore. So the change in price caused the real income to decrease. This fall in income caused a huge substitution effect, increases the consumption of apples from banana. So a fall in income caused an increase in consumption, thus meaning an inferior good. So apple is the inferior good, right? Your consumption of apple has increased. Um, okay, continuing from there, there's one, this might come out in the multiple choice. They might show you something like this in the multiple choice. And in this case, we see what is happening. We were originally at point A, the substitution effect kicks in at point B, but we now move to point C, which means what has happened, the price of rice has increased, right? But we end up consuming more rice. This is a exception. These type of products are called giffen goods. These type of goods is when price increase, we consume more of these products still. So they don't follow the typical law of demand, which is when price increase, demand decrease, right? So what is happening is, here the example is meat and rice, right? So we can't live without rice. So if the price of rice goes up, what we're going to do, we're going to cut down on the amount of meat we buy. As so, if you need, let's say you need 10 kilo of rice to survive, and the price of rice goes up, you're not going to buy 5 kilo of rice. um, what you're going to do, you're going to buy less meat and continue buying the amount of rice, or even more rice than you need, because you don't have meat. You have to eat more rice now to get full, right? So you would literally cut down on the amount of meat that you buy, and instead put that money towards buying more rice, as rice is more important than meat. So most necessity type of goods are given goods. And this is the situation that happens. We see that even though the substitution and the income effect is still moving in opposite direction, the income effect is actually greater than the substitution effect. So it says, as income fall causes a large income effect that outweighs the substitution effect, the demand of rice goes from Q3 with a big fall in the demand for meat, right? So you used to demand this amount of meat, you now are demanding this level of meat, while your demand for rice has slightly increased. So this given good might come out in a multiple choice. If you choose to answer this question, mentioning given good will show that you totally understand the concept of indifference curve and how substitution and income effect works. Um, this is another way to understand it. So we say that, again, remember all the way back in like ninth grade, when we learn elasticity, we used to say this part of the curve was elastic, this part was inelastic, right? We can do something similar with this, and we're basically saying that um, this portion is basically inferior, and this is normal, if I remember correctly. Brain is not working, I can't remember. Let me see. All right, so that's a general idea there, right? We as this is what you, so don't worry too much about this. This is just one way to show everything together in one curve. What you need to be able to do is basically you need to be able to explain this. You need to be able to explain when they move in opposite direction, the substitution effect is greater than the income effect. We have inferior. If they move in the opposite direction, if they move together, we have normal good, right? I shared with you, right? I had written an answer and drew the graph for one of the question. So B was what? Right here it says, discuss using an indifference curve analysis whether the demand for a good always increases when it price fall. So what you need to do is, it says, so here is where you can mention the given good, right? Or you should mention the given good, is that when the wait, let me see, discuss what indifference whether the demand for a good, my bad, you don't have to mention given good here. So the price falls in this case, right? So what you need to be able to do is, here you have to show the substitution and income effect. So if the price fall and demand increases, then it's a normal good, right? But if price decreases and quantity decreases, then it's an inferior good, right? So this is what I said you need to do. You need income and substitution effect needs to explain and apply to the context of falling prices. There are three alternatives. One, income and substitution effect are both positive and reinforce each other. Two, um, income effect is negative and substitution effect is positive, but more than the income effect. And three, income effect is negative but greater than the substitution effect. So these are the three combinations that you can have, right? So please read over the answers that I gave you, as these are to the questions that is possible to come, and then I try to give you a good explanation, right? Most of these answers were before ChatGPT, so you can easily just copy and paste it into ChatGPT, and it should be able to give you a better version than this. It says for the answer which concentrate either on fall and impact of demand and fall in price, showing the movement of the budget line and the impact of the quantity demanded, discuss the significance of the income effect and substitution effects accurate diagram. So you get basically 9, now it's like 20 points or something, right? But this was the 13 points one. So um, you have to be able to draw the graph properly, right? This is what I'm saying. If you choose to answer this question, you need to be able to draw the graph properly. So I think this is my own drawing. I think I drew it in this program that I'm always using. It should be somewhere in one of my drawings here. But anyways, this is a general idea, right? This is what we're seeing that is happening. We say you need to label the points on the indifference curve with numbers or some other system, for example, E1, E2, E3, to clearly show the movement from one point to another. So you have to clearly show where you started and where you're going from, where you're going to. Normal good is easy to understand when the price changes because income effect and the substitution effect move in the same direction. The problem is with inferior goods. So these were the notes that I was explaining. In the case of inferior goods, two effects of a price change act, the two effects, they work in opposite direction, right? Economic theory cannot tell us whether the income effect or substitution effect will be predominant. It is a matter of empirical research. However, you can consider the following second and third alternative measured above. So realistically, we can't know if the substitution or income effect is going to be greater. So when you're answering, you can choose either this one, option 2, which means the income effect is negative and the substitution effect is positive, but the income uh, but more than the income effect, or you can choose this situation, right? Income effect is negative but greater than the substitution effect. So here I explain it. This is the see the graph below. Note this could have been drawn as two separate graphs, but I draw it as one to save time and space. So you could, in the exam, you could draw two separate graphs. You could draw the income, if the income, the normal good, and you can draw the inferior good, right? You're explaining both things. If that is easier for you to do, then do it that way. I just drew everything together in one graph, and this is what we have. So here I said that basically the income effect is negative, but right now let me make income effect is negative but greater than the substitution effect. Substitution effect is negative and the income effect is negative and the substitution effect is positive but more than the income effect, right? So it says in this case, we look at only the price effect on one item B, an inferior good, as we're assuming A is a normal good. You would see this by graphing alternative 1, which is YE and SE are both positive and reinforce each other. So that's basically the purple line, right? We see both purple line are moving in the same direction. And then we say YE, the second thing that we can see says YE is negative and S, so the income effect is negative and the substitution effect is positive but more than the income effect. So basically here, right, we see the small purple line, it's negative, there's a fall. but the green line is basically um, increasing, right? Whatever we're talking about here. It says in this case, the SE effect would cause a movement from 1 to 2, basically from 1 to 2, the parallel line, and then the green arrow coupled with a negative income effect, the small purple arrow. This caused a small minimal increase in the quantity demanded of the inferior good. Why E is negative? So I'm explaining both three situations, right? The SC effect will is still the same, moving from 1 to 2, but in this case, the negative income effect, the large purple arrow, is far larger than the SE, so less of B is consumed. If this happens, then it would actually be a given good, and the reverse would happen if price increase. More would be consumed even though it's an inferior good. Think of rice example I gave. Bread is another good example. The substitution effect is always negative, so this is additional notes. You can see this from the above graph. As price of B falls, less of A is consumed. As more of B is substituted, move from 1 to 2. It is because holding the real income in constant, the consumer will always tend to substitute a good whose price has fallen for one which the price remains the same. Income effect is positive in the case of normal good and negative in the case of inferior good, right? So this is a situation here. I didn't write out the answer, right, like a complete answer, but I gave the main pointers that you need to write a proper answer, and I drew the graph. So again, you can draw it into two graphs if it's hard to understand, or if you can understand it, hopefully after this class, you should be able to draw it into two graphs, right? Don't remember if I had drawn it I don't think I drew it separately. Should have them somewhere here. Right, I think here I had them I drew it separately here. Right, so this is the one I'm using there in the answer, right? And then here is basically a different, this is having it, let me see what has happened here. B1 to B2, B1 to B2, 1, 2, 3. Right, this is just explaining the basic situation, right? So we see the income effect is greater than the substitution effect. On this side, the substitution effect is greater than the income effect. So we have the substitute from 1 to 2. The substitution effect is greater, right? But then the income effect kicks in, so it moves from 2 to 3. There is a small decrease in, again, in this case, um, consumption of air, right? And we end up with 0.3. So this is, you could draw two of this graph explaining what is happening. So in one case, the point will have to be somewhere down here, right? If you want to show both of them moving in the same direction. In this case, because originally the substitution effect was larger, and then the income effect moves in the opposite direction, the point has to be behind 2, right? This is why we're here at 0.3. If you want to show both of them moving together, then this new point has to be past 2, and then the purple arrow would turn the next direction, right? So you have to understand how you're drawing it on the graph. And this is where the difficulty is. Most students struggle here, so they avoid answering this question, as the theory is easy to explain, the graph is hard to draw. If you properly explain it, if you properly understand it, as you see how I did it here, it's possible to put both of them on one graph and then just do it this way, right? You can explain it properly what is happening. Okay, so that's it. We have finished the utilities section.